What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video. And as you can tell from the title, I'm going to be showing you what I think is the best budget gaming and video editing PC that you can build right now. But before I get into the video, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Alright, so the first and most important part to any PC is the CPU. Now, there are really only two brands that you can choose from when buying a CPU, and they are Intel and AMD. AMD seems to have better CPUs in the lower price range, but for the most part, Intel has better, mediocre, and high-priced CPUs, which is why for my CPU, I chose the Intel Core i7-9700K. It has 8 cores and 8 threads, and has a maximum memory size of 128GB. It also has a processor base frequency of 3.6 GHz and a max turbo frequency of 4 GHz, which really just makes everything run smoothly. Overall, it is definitely the best CPU that you can get at its price range. Along with the CPU, you are going to need a CPU cooler, and the one that I have chosen is the Noctua NH-D15. The only downside with it is that it is much larger than most CPU coolers. It stands at 165mm tall, and when building my PC, I noticed that it was definitely harder to build because of how large the cooler was. However, the two NF-A15 140mm high-performance fans have a max RPM of 1500, which provides good quality airflow to the CPU and throughout the case. So yes, there is a slight hindrance with the size of the cooler, but it makes up for it with its performance. You can't have a good PC if you don't have a good motherboard, which is why I chose the ROG Strix Z390E gaming motherboard. It supports 8th and 9th generation Intel CPUs, has 4 DDR4 RAM slots, and has 2 M.2 slots, both of which are heatsinks. It also has 2 graphics card slots, which brings us to our graphics card, the MSI Radeon RX 5500 XT. It can be bought with either 4GB or 8GB, but the one I am using is the 8GB one. However, if you had less of a budget, it would be fine to get the 4GB model because everything in both cards are exactly the same. This graphics card has 22 compute units, 1408 stream processors, a game clock of 1717 MHz, and a boost clock of 1845 MHz, while running on 130 watts. Overall, it is a great budget choice as it can compete with models much more expensive than it. For our memory, we have 16GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 RAM. The version that I purchased is 3200 MHz, which I would recommend getting, but if you have a smaller budget, 3000 MHz should be fine. It is also able to be overclocked to almost 4000 MHz and doesn't use much power as it only uses 1.2 volts. The brand of RAM that you get doesn't really matter, but I would recommend getting at least 16GB running at least 3000 MHz. A really underestimated part of any PC is the power supply. Buyers tend to spend less money on it because they think that it isn't very important, but that is not the case. The power supply runs your whole system, so if something were to happen to it, it could easily fry the whole PC. To make sure that this doesn't happen, I chose the Corsair RM 650 watts. It is rated at 80 plus gold, which is the minimum rating that you should get on a power supply. Anything less than that could possibly endanger your system. Because 80 plus gold is the recommended minimum, I would upgrade it in a few years just to be safe. Next up, we have our solid state drive or SSD, which is the Crucial MX500. This SSD is 500GB and is probably the most commonly bought brand of SSDs. It can be bought with more or less gigabytes depending on what you need for your PC and what your budget is. The final part to this build is the hard drive or HDD. Some budget PCs don't have a hard drive, but they aren't very expensive, so I think it is worth investing in one. The one that I have chosen is the Seagate BarraCuda, and I got the 2TB version. Like the SSD, this is probably the most commonly bought brand of hard drives, which shows that it is a great choice. The piece to bring all of these parts together is the case. The one that I have chosen is the NZXT H510 Elite, but buying a case is really up to the buyer's preference and budget. In this particular build, almost any case will work, as long as it can hold ATX motherboards and is at least a mid-tower case. The total price for this PC is around $1,400, which is slightly pushing the term budget, but it is definitely worth the investment. If this price is over your budget, I would recommend getting a 1TB SSD and not getting a hard drive. You could also only get 8GB of RAM or find a cheaper motherboard that is still compatible with the Intel CPU. However, if you have room in your budget, I'd recommend investing in a better power supply and graphics card. One final thing to keep in mind when buying your PC is that you need to get a monitor and install Windows, which could range anywhere from an extra $200 to $600. Anyways, I hope this video helped you decide which parts to buy for your next gaming and video editing PC. Thanks for watching.